Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's Mike Shea, your Florida business broker. Here with Bobby Lean again of Bobby Lean Law, um, the new cleaned up post-COVID version. He was telling me before we started this that he had to go out and hunt down a barber that was still operating. Um, so I think he looks awesome. So if you leave some comments for him that his haircut and his trimmed up beard is pretty sweet looking, that'd be awesome. But we talked to Bobby 2 weeks ago on COVID and insurance and reviewing stuff like this. And we were coming out of COVID and then the insanity of the last week and what's been happening to business owners started to come to fruition. So I reached out to him yesterday and said, hey, let's kind of get some data, with the obvious disclaimers from a law perspective, but some talking points for business owners on the riots, protecting your stores, stand your ground, property rights, et cetera, and obviously the subsequent insurance implications. So thanks for coming back, Bobby. Let's get into it so we can give some business owners some info.
No problem. Glad to be back. Yeah, the haircut, I think it looks great. Anyway, yeah, as always, our legal disclaimer, this is not legal advice. Please don't use it as such. This is just for informational purposes only, et cetera, et cetera. We had talked last time about common sense reopening and how that, will impact going forward when you're reopening and using common sense. What we did not foresee is the change of social issues that were not, readily available to be seen in reference to the current rioting situation and civil commotion and this, that, and the other. And while everything that was said in our previous video, I think is still very important and certainly something to be mindful of as you continue to reopen, we're seeing something else start up that we needed to talk about, namely rioting, right? So we didn't anticipate that, but here we are. And we certainly didn't anticipate a nationwide or an international riot situation. Admittedly, your feelings on the issue surrounding George Floyd, obviously that is very saddening and disheartening, and certainly something that we would want to raise awareness to, and peaceful protesting and things like that. But when it comes to rioting, we as business owners have to really think things through in a situation where we didn't think we would have to. Rioting, just in the terms of insurance coverage, right? Rioting is standard policy language in the majority of residential and commercial policies. It's there right next to volcanic eruptions. So that's how often insurance companies think that this is going to be an issue. So why would you even think about it? But here we are. So we'll go over a few topics today, as Mike mentioned, with property rights, the insurance implications, as well as, potential issues surrounding standing your ground.
So, on the insurance, since it's standard to every insurance, that assumes that the business owner, much like in a house, should do some things so that there's proof of what was there beforehand, i.e., they should have pictures, they should have videos of the interior. If they have internal security, they should have that set up so that it doesn't get destroyed in a fire or the destruction that happens in the looting or the rioting, but it's sent to the cloud, right? So, if you own a business, take the 5 minutes, use your damn cell phone and video the interior so there's proof and record of what was there. Date stamp that sucker, stick it on the cloud so that when, God forbid this happens, you actually have proof, and it expedites the process with the insurance company, right?
Absolutely. As we mentioned before, document. The more documentation you have, the better off you're going to be, and the less headaches you're going to have down the road. When it comes to your particular type of insurance, as it relates to the rioting, your inventory, by and large, is going to be covered, right? Maybe not the value of that inventory that you would have received had you sold it, but certainly the amount you paid for it as a business is certainly going to be a covered expenditure, whether or not the insurance wants to play games under scope and pricing and say, well, you got a really bad deal on your widget, so we're only going to give you what we think you should have paid for your widget.
Right.
That's
So
common.
that brings up a point, and I've talked to CPAs when we've done these discussions. To prove that to the insurance company about what the margin should be or what the cost was of it this is why you need to have good books and records. This is why you should have QuickBooks or any other accounting software, and you need to be posting invoices and receipts and not taking cash, because when you don't have the data and the documentation and you go to get the reimbursement from the insurance company, you're going to lose that argument because you don't have the data. So one more reason to be on the legitimate side if you're in a business that has a cash element to it, to post that stuff. I'm thinking vending, restaurants, bars, stuff where transactions are under $10, pizza parlors, things like that. Too often I'm coming across where they're pocketing things or their books are sloppy from pure laziness. And then when stuff like this goes down, including PPP, because you couldn't get PPP if you haven't paid yourself properly, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Now you know why you should do things on the up and up, go forward. And if you've done it right, then you're in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And going back to your inventory, scope and pricing issues, they're always going to happen. This is my lawyer plug. You should always involve a lawyer early and often. But my kind of 2 cents in, what you paid is what you paid. If it wasn't a good business sense, that is really not the insurance place, in my opinion, to tell you how to run your business.
Right.
That's just the size of it. That's what it costs you. That's what it's going to take to make you whole. So anyway, again, that's just my personal beliefs on it, and it doesn't matter.
No, I agree with you. Look, insurance companies are not there to make business decisions about how you run your business. They're not, putting the risk on the line. They're paid a fee. They need to recoup it. Period. That they end. But you got to document in order to win that argument.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. With the receipts, the videography, as you had mentioned, it is real simple. Snap a quick shot with your cell phone. It's not like it's not in your hand anyway.
Right. Absolutely. What about so the obvious next question is, we've seen people on TV being assaulted in their stores or defending it, and there was a cop that was killed, or a retired policeman who was killed in a pawn shop last night. Protecting the business. Let's talk about that elephant in the room.
Sure. For that one, I'm gonna pull out notes to make sure that I get it correct.
No, I mean you drive to work, and I was driving my wife to the hospital the other day. It was right in the middle of some protests in Lakeland. You have to worst case scenario plan, and what are your actions going to be? You try to avoid things, but sometimes circumstance happens, and at what point do you react or not react, and what are the consequences and implications of both of those things?
Right, of course. So in Florida, we do have the concept of stand your ground, which by and large basically just means you do not have a duty to retreat in instances where use of deadly force may be imminent. Under very extreme limited circumstances, of course. So as it relates to people, you do have a right to stand your ground and not only use but threaten to use deadly force if it is let me look at the actual wording. If it is reasonably necessary to prevent imminent harm or great bodily injury to yourself or another, you're going to have this kind of implied stand your ground ability. Now, what does that mean? Every case is going to be different, right? And it's more of a subjective kind of standard. There's no hard or fast rule, if this, then that. My only advice is always, use common sense. But at the end of the day, if you are really fearing for your life, that's that's something that you have kind of in your back pocket, so to speak, that you can fall back on, right? Or you're protecting someone else. But it's a very, very fine line. I don't know if anyone here remembers the case in Florida involving an individual who was shoved, very forcibly shoved, and over a parking lot spot, I believe. And they tried to use the qualified immunity, or I'm sorry, not qualified immunity, but the immunity of stand your ground defense, saying that this guy feared for his life. Well, what happened after the shove, the victim in this instance ultimately had backed up and was returning to his vehicle for what? Who knows? Could have been to grab a weapon or something. We weren't there. We don't know what happened. But that act of backing up was enough to give a jury reasonable. I'm sorry, not reasonable, but enough information for them to convict this individual of manslaughter. So let me back up. There's a shove, and then this guy, the legal term of art would be retreat. We don't know what was happening, but the individual on the ground, still fearing for his life, who had a concealed carry permit, did withdraw his weapon and fire. And ultimately, the other individual died. And so is it going to be a situation where it's worth that type of stress? Obviously, bigger, broader picture, is what's happening worth another human life, right? And that's what you got to think about in any instance where you're wanting to use or think you're justified in using deadly force.
Yeah, I think my 2 cents on this is that your life isn't worth it. Even when I was in the military, we would regularly train about economy of force, using the minimal amount of force to protect property and people. And in that world, there's rules of engagement, and you have to get fired on before you fire. I think if you're managing a store and you're backed into a corner and there's 50 people beating on you, the line's been crossed at that point. You could reasonably say, hey, I'm feeling threatened. But if you're taking a TV, let them take the TV. I mean, it's not worth that. And there are greater issues at hand. At the end of the day, you have to go home. And usually, I think, I have a concealed carry permit. It's funny how having it, you don't really encounter problems, right? You just don't. People tend not to. They tend to not. They tend to not hit hardened targets, so to speak. And as you know, I'm not a little guy. But if you have the security systems and you make things difficult in your property or your business for people to get at, there's video cameras, those preventive measures make it difficult for these circumstances to happen. I have some friends who had their stores smashed. I know the Krispy Kreme got hit over by Millennia. I know the Panda got hit. But there's a whole lot of preventive, security measures you can put in place. Like, you met that guy at our BNI meeting who had that tinting glass, who hardens the exterior of the facility. Oh, yeah. They have that application technology now to prevent rocks and things from going through windows. You make it difficult for a thief. They're by and large lazy. They're going to move on to the soft target. So, insurance companies love to see you harden your target in your business as well. Yes, it's an expense, but there's credits and benefits. And oh, by the way, continuing to operate post one of these events out here is a whole lot better than, not being able to operate. So think like a business person. We're in business to make money. Yeah. You're not John Wayne, right? This isn't
absolutely. And that ties into my next point is, while you do have this right to stand your ground for imminent death or great bodily injury to you or others, you do not have that right when it comes to protecting property. There is no cause, no statute that would allow you, in general terms, to protect your property through the use or threat of deadly force. That said, unless it is to prevent a forcible felony, which is, what is that? By and large, assaults to people, anything involving violence towards another, you're not going to really see usually. Ones that might happen in the course of a business owner: robbery, carjacking outside, kidnapping. Those are all very plausible things that could happen as a result of the riots and the looting, right? That said, you have insurance, it covers it. Is it really worth putting yourself in that situation? Take a step back. You're going to recoup those costs. That's my personal advice. Moreover, legal
Yeah, I
advice.
mean, you avoid the situation that's going to put you in jeopardy where you have to make that bad choice.
Right.
And
Exactly.
that's how a business person makes the decision. There's the emotion, and it's almost this binary like world you live in. It's like, okay, yeah, I agree or I disagree with what's going on, but then there's the business to run, and your job is to make money and produce and provide for yourself and your family. Don't go put yourself in harm's way. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like
Absolutely.
my wife walking to the parking garage from the hospital. Like, okay, you can take steps. You can make sure you walk in lighted areas. You can make sure you're walking in a team of 2 or 3s. You can ask for security to escort you. Don't be Rambo, right? Use some common sense and apply, preventive tactics to eliminate the circumstance of you, getting into a jam. And business owners need to operate that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you're right, those preventative measures really speak volumes, not only to your insurance carrier, but if you do find yourself in this situation, you did
Yeah.
have those preventative measures, it's a lot, I would think it would be a lot easier sell, so to speak, pun intended, that you were qualified to stand your ground, because why wouldn't
What
you
else
be
could you
in
have done?
fear?
Yeah.
Right. Why else would you, not be in fear if they, pass your alarms and, all of your other preventative measures?
Yeah.
That's a person who's very determined to do harm, in my
Right.
opinion.
Right. They broke through the door. They violated, they went over the fence. They broke through the door. They jimmied the lock. It's like, you didn't accidentally appear in my store at that point, right?
No,
You're
no,
carrying a
no.
gun. Whether you reach for the gun or not, you're carrying. They're taking steps to create the threat. You have done all these steps to avoid the threat or the circumstance, and at that point, God forbid, you have to take an action. You've created an evidentiary trail, so to speak, that said, hey, I did everything I possibly could do. What else could I have
Absolutely.
done, Your Honor? Right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sad we have to think that way. All right.
It
So
really
let's
is.
stand your ground. We're going to talk about business owners who lease properties versus business owners that own the property. There's some distinction there.
Yeah. So by and large, you can think of it as a residential rental. If you're an individual, most of us as business owners at one point in our life have rented a house, right? If you damage the property, you have to pay for that property, right? You wouldn't ask your landlord to repair something that you broke,
Right.
right? The same is true if something the landlord did ruin the property. The owner of the property is going to have to fit that bill, right? So what happens when you are leasing a commercial property and it's not anything you did or anything that the owner did, right? So who's going to be responsible for those damages? Well, first thing you're going to want to look at is your lease contract. What's it say? Some are better than others, obviously. Some are 400 pages long, some are a page.
Right.
It's just the way that it is. So what does that say? Does that give any guidance? And then at that point, you're going to want to look at both the owner of the property's insurance policy, if any, and the business owner's insurance policy, or is any one of those going to be covered? If you have a business and say you have a service industry business like the pool cleaning, or lawn maintenance, you're not really thinking long-term overhead because you probably don't have a very large base of operations, so to speak, because all of everything you have is out on the field, right? So you may not have insurance that covers the property itself, but you have a liability, or commonly referred to as an error and omissions policy, which basically just protects individuals that the businesses harms through their conduct, right? So an E&O policy is not going to help if a rioter breaks the window on your storefront.
Sure.
So you're going to want to have some type of property coverage, unless, again, you're leasing it and your owner has that coverage. Open up the lines of communication, talk to people. That's the only way you're ever going to know what is.
Yeah, I mean, at a practical level, whether, let's forget COVID and let's forget the riot. It is very common that a tenant fails to read the lease in all its detail. And it's usually, like, the thing I always remind them is, like, you got to see who's responsible for the air conditioning unit, right? Because that will have a problem, right?
Oh, yeah.
And they're looking inside their box. They're 4 walls, they're 360 degrees that make up that box they're living in, their little restaurant. And they're not thinking about the industrial stuff on the roof that may get hit by a lightning strike, right? And, because they've got other things in their mind. And the attorneys, real estate attorneys specifically, should be looking at leases and then what happens if there is a hurricane, right? What if there's a leak in the roof? Who eats that cost? And very subtly, sometimes in some complicated language, it's on the burden of the tenant. And if the tenant doesn't catch that on the front end, guess what? We have hurricanes, we have storms, so yeah, we have riots too now, right? Next to all we need is a volcano to erupt in Apopka or something, and
Right.
so read your leases, and we're not. If this year has not taught everybody something, it should have taught them that what can go wrong will go wrong. And I never thought I'd say this, but you never know the price of not having a lawyer until you get into a jam and you find out what you screwed up on the front end you never thought would come up. And the longer I'm in business, the more I know that insurance is a tricky thing, and the $350 to $500 you're going to spend on a lawyer to review a policy is well worth it in the long run.
Right. And think about the insurance itself. They are a business, and make no mistake about it, they are in the business of making money.
Of not paying.
Do what?
Of not paying. That's
right. Exactly. And that's how they make their money. They get their premiums in, and the only way to make money is to not have to pay out large sums of money.
Right.
So, and you factor that in with, ultimately you have a fallible human being who is an adjuster looking at this, thinking X, Y, Z, under the guise of, if we pay out, we better make damn sure that we needed to pay this claim. Otherwise, I'm going to be, at fault or in trouble or some other type of performance metrics that the insurance company has. So they may interpret something a little bit differently than actually what it is in Florida, so especially if you have an insurance carrier that has multi-state lines of insurance. What is legally something here in Florida may not be legally something in Tennessee, or vice versa. So you have an adjuster who's not a lawyer, who is worried about making the right call and the right decision for the benefit of the business of the insurance company, making those type of usually legal distinctions with really no basis and no rationale to really do so. And that's when you get these denials, or you get these issues of scope and pricing, simply because that they think that they're justified in doing it, whether it be based off of some other state law or some internal policies or procedures within the insurance company. So again, that is why it's very important to consult lawyers early and often.
Right. Okay. All right. So we've gone through property rights. We went to a little John Rambo stand your ground. We did business owners owning property versus leasing. And we talked a little bit of insurance. What else would we like to cover on this one?
Well, let's see.
Besides that snazzy haircut.
You're right. I was stumbling upon, I was in reviewing for the interview, I was going through a standard liability policy, and something struck me. It's about terrorism, believe it or not. Policy clauses that have to do with terrorism. And it's a little subjective, but, I think it's, interesting to know. Specifically, what's the difference between riots and terrorism. I mean, when you think about it, you think you know the distinction, right? One is an attack on the United States. One is a protest gone wrong.
Well, I mean, we had, I mean, and it's not outside the realm. We had a questionable incident at Pulse, right? Was that terrorism or was that a domestic, cuckoo, right? And,
Right.
everyone forgets that those two, that husband and wife who owned multiple restaurants, right? Um, I imagine right now they're probably defending themselves in multiple suits. I don't know that, but I can only imagine. Um, and what did their policies say regarding that circumstance, and how do they get held accountable or not held accountable? I mean, how would you predict that a guy'd walk in and start shooting up a club, right?
Right. Exactly. And what's important to note is, we're talking about XYZ here in this video. We're making arguments, we're making distinctions based off of our understanding, right? And that's somebody else is going to have the exact opposite opinion. And that's what's so, sometimes it can be frustrating as a business owner to understand insurance policies, because you think it says this. But you're going to meet 7 other people who either A says it says something different, or can make an argument to suit whatever need that they have for it to say, right? So there's actually kind of a fine line, I think, between what's going on, the true definition of a riot versus the true definition of what's called a certified act terrorism in your insurance policy. Other than you have to have like 3 different government officials declare that it's an act of terrorism. The actual definition of riots can be very similar. Let me pull it out real quick.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's a stretch for us to go into that discussion, because I mean, we've had it here locally, not just a few years ago. If you've been living in a rock or under a rock for the last 48 hours and not watched the news, the president declared Antifa, a domestic terrorism organization, and you could see the left kind of losing their mind over that, and not for you and me to get into that discussion. We'll go on for a couple hours, but you know, it the world we live in, you probably need to have it in your damn policy, and you can't get frustrated that the language has to be so damn expansive. That's not the lawyers. Because again, we talked about this last time we chatted. Unless you've been to court, you don't know the arguments that get presented and how insane they go, and the distinctions and the nuanced angles that a defense attorney or a prosecuting attorney, or in criminal cases, but in a any type of plaintiff circumstance, to try and twist it, and the judge sits there and looks at the law, and if it's not detailed enough and clear, in theory, they rule against what the law says. And if the law is poorly written, you're shit out of luck. I'm sorry for the language, but that's how the judges operate. It's very black and white. They're not activists. I mean, every judge I've ever met, even my college roommate, is just, this is what it says and this is what it doesn't say. And I rule based upon what the law says, not my personal opinion. And they were able to live in that world. It's not right or wrong. Right.
Well, so, in law school, going way back, we kind of had an understanding of the difference between a lawyer and a judge, right? A judge makes the decision, but what the lawyer's job really is to do is to make an argument that makes that judge see their side and their point, whether it's sharply worded or crafty or what have you, or if it's just a terrible argument that makes a lot of common sense. Whatever you can do to have the judge see your side of the story within the confines of the law. I mean, you're obviously not going to make stuff up.
Well, some do. I've seen lawsuits, and I've seen they make a case when the law isn't even applicable and it gets tossed out. And business owners need to understand that process and how it flows. And again, that's a business as well. So bottom line is, everyone needs to get your insurance policies out, have them reviewed now. We're in a new world, and you need to plan accordingly and understand the consequences and the risk you run by making bad choices with regard to insurance policies. And doing simple things like videoing and Oh, that'll, if you live in a world and you think, it's never going to happen in Orlando. I'm just amazed. Like 5 years ago, someone walks into a bar and shoots up a place, and it's terrorism on our home ground. Americans have an amazing capacity to forget. It's one of our greatest gifts, but man, history just repeats itself over and over again. There's nothing new. I mean, we're still dealing with race, 200, 100 and something years since we freed the slaves.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail right on the head. Who would have thought we'd be here? Well, we should have, because we already were, right, at some point.
Nothing new.
Not at all. Not at all. And, go ask a lawyer, ask anybody. I can't stress this enough. If you are questioning, or if you have a question, or you thought of a good idea for your business, ask a lawyer. It beats getting the answer, or at least some type of legal explanation up front, that you can kind of fall back on if it goes sideways.
Mm-hmm.
You say, well, I did the best I could. I did reach out. I asked a lawyer. I reasonably believe that what the lawyer was telling me was true and accurate, right? So that's going to, for any instance, that's going to give you some type of legal ground later on if if it does go awry.
Well, in our business, I teach our agents, hey, you need to follow a process, and the process is outlined. If you follow the process, and you do your non-disclosures, you document everything, you copy your emails. There's a reason we do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
The reason is for the 1% thing that goes wrong, because you're in a whole lot better position when you pick up a piece of paper and go, I told you so, and here's the documentation.
Absolutely.
And then you look like a genius, right? That's the wisdom. It's the wisdom of following the process. It's annoying, but it's there for a reason, because we've learned hard lessons, right?
Absolutely.
Hey, Bobby,
absolutely.
Thanks for doing this. I'm going to send this out.
Excellent. I appreciate it.
How do they want to get a hold of you?
Yeah, great idea. Website is www.leanonmelaw.com. My office phone number is 407-502-0053. Email is bobby@leanonmelaw.com.
All right, man. Thank you. Have a good weekend.